Hello.
Hello.
So first of all, thank you so much for joining us and for agreeing to this interview. Would you like to start off by introducing yourself?
Well, my name is Ian, and I've been here quite a long time. In fact, I began at GSA in September 1970. And I came to GSA quite by chance, really, because I'd been an actor, and I had recently married, and I thought it'd be a rather satisfactory thing if I could sustain the family dependably, more dependably than I did as a jobbing actor. But I went to Lambda and trained, and happened to train with some really rather good actors. Donald Sutherland was one of them. Janet Sussman was another. It was a fairly strong vintage. And then I went into rep. And that's where I suppose my real life experience began. Because I'd been to school, and then like others of my generation, I'd done national service, but I'd been a conscientious objector, of course, and I joined a relief organisation, and my experience had been of forestry, and to a lesser extent of refugees. And since my parents had had two German girls after the war, whose father had been taken by the Russians, and large parts of Germany were starving by about 1947, and my parents were hospitable to two girls who had never spoken English and for whom England was the enemy. And that had shaped my feelings further about the way in which we regard the environment and other human beings. That really had been the only life experience that I brought to the theatre. It was very interesting because in this organisation I was given the responsibility of running a forestry unit, and it was comprised of people of very different nationalities, all of whom had to get on together. And because it was a relief organisation, we were living on a minimum, 50p a week, if you can believe it. It was 10 shillings, of course, plus one's board and a clothing allowance and 2 journeys home a year. But it was very minimal. And we lived on a very minimum diet. And nobody was ever ill. I didn't remark upon it at the time, but throughout the 18 months that I was running that unit, no man had a day off for ill health, because we were living on a diet and in circumstances that required fitness. Matters of language and the practical skills attending growing trees and such, they almost came afterwards. Then I went into rep. And in those days with regional theatre, if one was lucky, one was with a company for about 3 months. But more often, in my case, one was invited for a production to play a particular part, and then one was once again bred hunting. So one had to adapt to a place one had never been in before on equity minimum, which was about £5. And being Scots, I was used to living on minimums. And I used markets and rapidly learned that the first thing to do when you go to a new town or city is to discover where the market is. And the chances are that without ingratiating yourself in any way, stall holders will see the sort of being you are and will take some sort of pity on you, or at least they will offer you fruit or vegetables that they wouldn't offer to anybody else because they would know you wouldn't waste them, and they would give you these for very little money. And one made a relationship with these people. Had the curious experience of driving through Carlisle 7 years after I'd been in the Sleeping Beauty, and for old time's sake, going into the market and being hailed by name by the chap from whom I used to buy apples and bananas those 7 years previously. And it bore upon me yet further how interconnected people are at the level of sustaining life. It didn't require a great description or ethos. So when I came to GSA, I was concerned with people's survival in order to be free to practice their craft. Because although there was more work around of a humble kind in those days with regional theatre, there was still the problem of survival. And it's not a skill in which all actors are well served. Some are. They're not always the good artists. They're sometimes very good businessmen. But that's how my concern for the whole being, as distinct from the actor, began.
So while growing up, you describe your connection with the land in a way, and with the seasons.
Oh, yes.
How does this continue to influence sustainability in your day-to-day life? Is this something that continues to now?
Yes, because my wife and I have a family, and I was absolutely resolved that our two sons would grow up with an appreciation of how things really are, rather than the way in which the world presents them. And so, from the outset, we found land to cultivate, whether it be an allotment or a garden. We're fortunate enough to have a garden now, but it's not one that would sustain a family. So very soon after moving to Godalming in 1972, I acquired an allotment, and then another allotment under my wife's name, so we would have sufficient land to be able to sustain life, at least with non-protein food, whatever the indignities of one's work in the theatre, which was always underpaid in when compared with other activities in life. All sorts of ironies attached to this.
And as well as physical health, how do you think a connection with the environment can impact your mental health and the benefits that has?
Absolutely, without question. One's discrimination is heightened. One notices so much more. What comes out of a packet is predictable. What you choose from a market stall or what you pick from a tree, that's a matter of choice. And experience affects those choices. And you know full well that if one's been climbing in the hills and one stops for lunch and one only has a couple of sandwiches and an apple, somehow the relish that one has for that food is indescribable to one who hasn't had experience of it. And I think all one's food, all one's living, really, falls into that. If we didn't have freedom of choice, our lives would be miserable indeed. So I see a relation to the earth and a relation to other people as being integral to the sensibility and training and skill of an actor.
And so looking forward to the future and keeping in context of theatre, whereabouts do you see sustainability taking theatre in the future, and where do you think the actors sit as part of that progress?
Well, I think they're at an immediate advantage because they know about minimums. We have productions with minimums, no costume or no lighting, all that. And we know that the essence of it can be independent of it. And I think that actors are aware that people can be independent of their physical circumstance and work as communities or with ideas that are untried with confidence when that conviction is lived out by example. And I think that there will be less luxury as a norm in society at large, quite simply because not everybody can live with the excesses that have characterized the most fortunate. And people have become adjusted, not only adjusted, they've become accustomed to living with levels of consumption that they neither need nor society can afford, and are unwilling to acknowledge that because of what it implies. And I think that if society is to change, it needs that catalyst that the insubordinate, searching, life-relishing actor brings to a subject, to a question. Does that answer it
absolutely.
in any way?
Absolutely brilliantly put as well.
Because it's always going to be individual.
Yes.
And we know that. And we prize the quiddities of those who are most exasperating when they belong to that being. And they can be independent of their quiddities what makes them odd or difficult, and be emancipated from them. And we all would like to be emancipated from our habitual views, structures. And society, of course, needs that. And it's not going to come from lawyers or accountants or doctors. They're always repairing an order that has in some way fallen apart because people have ceased to listen. They've been swept into action before they've reflected upon circumstance.
Absolutely. Is there anything else that you would like to add to the whole, so this is following up the Waste as a Design Flaw seminar. Is there anything else that you would like to kind of say on that topic?
Well, in practical terms, when I began teaching, I realized that almost no one reading a Shakespeare play understood the countryside, and still less did they understand the relation between language and things, and how we use things to illustrate feelings, because the abstract world can only be made real by reference to things in the substantial scheme. So, simple example, my love is like a red, red rose. Well, if you know about roses, that has a depth of resonance that cannot possibly obtain if you only know it as a concept defined in the dictionary, or one of those bunches that can be bought even in a market without any scent and thornless, without all the characteristics that attend that as a potential image of relationship, beauty, evanescence, everything else. Being aware of that, I thought I will take everyone out. We were rehearsing A Midsummer Night's Dream, a smaller school then. And I thought I'll take everyone out in the evening. It's a play that happens at night, and very few people in the cast had ever been out at night without a torch. And even those who had only done so reluctantly. And I wanted everyone to go out and experience the countryside as it is before we interfere with it. And almost always, of course, we are interfering with it. We're looking, if we're entomologists, we're looking for butterflies, or ornithologists, and so on. We look in terms of our use, but very rarely do we present ourselves to listen, hear, smell, and feel without interference. And so we took a walk out in the wood at night without anyone speaking, because the moment you speak, you come out of the now, you come into another world, and you leave the physical circumstances. So everybody came out at dusk, and then we walked on, and of course adjustment to the light and the river and birds, even animals. And that sense of mystery and wonder and apprehension and curiosity was awakened in people in the life rather than something I said about it. And I've always tended to talk too much when I did talk at all. And I knew that nothing I said would bring this about, but the experience would be direct for each individual in his or her way. And it resonated. It's a tradition we've sustained for over 40 years now. And one wants people to be friends with not only other beings, but the materials from which those beings are dressed and nourished, and that we celebrate.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Pleasure.